The first thing Fleet Chronicler Veth noticed was the silence. Not the silence of empty space. Veth had cataloged 17 varieties of that particular absence across 4 decades of Imperial service. This was different. This was the silence of a recording that should have contained screaming. The distress beacon from Task Force Orion had transmitted for 11 seconds before going dark. 11 seconds of carrier signal, clean and unbroken. No voices, no hull stress alerts, no emergency protocols firing in sequence the way they always did when a warship died. Just 11 seconds of open channel. And then nothing. Veth played it again. The waveform sat flat and featureless on the display, a geometric nothing that the analysis systems kept flagging as corrupted data, because the alternative, that 43 warships had ceased to exist so completely, and so quickly that not one crew member had managed to speak a single word into an open microphone, was not a conclusion the Imperial analysis systems were architecturally capable of reaching. Veth reached it anyway. 43 ships, gone in 11 seconds of silence. The humans had done something. Veth just couldn't yet imagine what. 3 months earlier, the Dominion of the Eternal Throne had done humanity the considerable courtesy of announcing the invasion. This was standard Imperial procedure. The Dominion had absorbed 207 civilizations across 6,000 years, and in that time had developed a bureaucratic elegance to the process. A formal declaration of absorption would be transmitted to the target world. The target world's leadership would be given 40 standard cycles, approximately 32 of Earth's days, to arrange a peaceful transfer of governance. Then the fleet would arrive, and whatever arrangement had been reached would be honored, and the world would become a productive member of the Dominion's vast and orderly machinery. 206 civilizations had accepted. One had asked for an extension to file the appropriate counter-documentation, which the Dominion had granted, because it cost nothing to be civilized about these things. The Dominion dispatched Task Force Orion to Earth with 43 vessels, considerably more than the 12 typically sent to a single biosphere civilization of Earth's technological tier. The excess was deliberate. Earth's transmissions had reached Imperial listening posts some 40 years prior, and what the analysts had reviewed gave the senior strategists a faint, professional unease they could not quite articulate. There was something in the human broadcasts, a particular texture to the violence, the drama, the obsessive storytelling, that suggested the species was less predictable than its technology level implied. So they sent 43 ships instead of 12. It would not be enough. But no one knew that yet, least of all the humans, who had spent their 32 days doing something the Dominion's observers in the outer system had documented extensively without understanding at all. The humans had not evacuated their leaders. They had not built shelters. They had not broadcast surrender negotiations, or opened diplomatic channels, or done any of the 17 measurable things that a civilization with access to Dominion transmissions typically did in the 32-day window. Instead, they had gone quiet. The Dominion's outer system observation drones had watched Earth's communication traffic drop by 63% in the first week, not because the humans had stopped talking to each other. The remaining 37% showed clear evidence of intense, encrypted, distributed activity across every continent simultaneously. They had stopped broadcasting outward. They had turned inward, like an organism pulling its extremities close to its core. They are in shock, wrote senior analyst Perthies in her formal assessment. The psychological literature of precontact civilizations consistently demonstrates a paralytic response to confirmed extraterrestrial contact. The cessation of outward communication is consistent with civilizational denial. They have likely not communicated the threat to their general population, which suggests internal political fracture. Recommend standard arrival protocol. Probability of armed resistance, less than 4%. Perthes was a meticulous analyst. She had been correct about 203 civilizations. She had never been wrong in a way that mattered. Fleet Admiral Koss commanded Task Force Orion, and Koss was, by any reasonable measure, a remarkable officer. Koss had personally overseen the absorption of 11 civilizations. Koss had written the definitive strategic manual on first contact force deployment, a document so thoroughly researched that the Dominion's war academies had used it for 60 years without revision. When Task Force Orion dropped from transit fold into the outer edge of Earth's solar system, Koss ran the standard approach. Long-range sensor sweep, communications broadcast on all detected human frequencies, a formal reiteration of the Declaration of Absorption, and then a measured advance toward the third planet at precisely the speed that signal propagation models suggested would give the target civilization's leadership enough time to see the fleet, realize the scope of it, and contact one another in enough panic to accelerate a decision toward surrender. The fleet was beautiful, in the way that absolute certainty tends to be beautiful. 43 vessels arranged in the Dominion's traditional absorption formation, the cradle configuration, which its designers had determined was simultaneously the most efficient approach vector and the most psychologically overwhelming visual from a planetary surface. It looked from below like a closing hand. Koss waited for the human response. It came 18 minutes later. Not a surrender transmission, not a negotiation request. A single woman's voice, flat and unhurried, speaking in standard interstellar, the universal trade language that had been included in the Dominion's original declaration as a courtesy. Fleet Admiral Koss, my name is General Yara Vasquez. I am authorized to speak for Earth's Unified Defense Command. We have reviewed your declaration of absorption. We decline. Please turn your fleet around. This is the only communication you will receive from us before we begin. Koss stared at the translation for a long moment. Begin what? Koss asked, to no one in particular. No answer came from the planet. Koss filed the response under psychological resistance posturing, a documented behavior pattern in which a target civilization's military leadership performed confidence for domestic political reasons, buying time while civilian leadership arranged surrender behind closed doors. It was almost always theater. The strategy had a documented resolution rate of 91% within 72 hours of fleet arrival. Koss ordered the fleet to continue its advance and went asleep. Veth, reviewing the mission logs 3 months later in the silence of an Imperial debriefing chamber, would come back to that moment repeatedly. Not to Koss's decision, that was defensible, professionally, given everything Koss knew. Veth kept returning to what the fleet's passive sensors had recorded during those 72 hours of advance. Things that had been logged, cataloged, flagged as anomalous, and then ignored. The first anomaly appeared 19 hours into the fleet's approach, when a long-range thermal sensor detected a brief, intense energy signature from the surface of Earth's largest continent. The signature lasted 3 seconds and then disappeared. The duty officer who reviewed it noted that it matched no known human weapons technology in the Dominion's database and filed it as sensor interference. The second anomaly was a gravitational microfluctuation detected by 3 separate ships simultaneously, 31 hours into the approach. The fluctuation was tiny, well below any threshold associated with weapons deployment in the Dominion's threat assessment framework. The analysis system flagged it. A different duty officer reviewed it, agreed it was below threshold, and returned to other work. The third anomaly was a pattern. Specifically, the pattern of anomalies 1 and 2 repeating in different locations, at irregular intervals, across the inner solar system, 7 more times over the following 18 hours. No single duty officer saw all 7 instances. No one connected them. They were practicing, Veth said aloud, to the empty debriefing chamber on the 14th time reviewing the logs. They were practicing the whole time we were approaching. The realization sat in Veth's chest like a swallowed stone. But that was only the first thing Veth had misunderstood. The second thing was worse. General Yara Vasquez had not slept in 31 hours when Lieutenant Commander Priya Akafer found her in the coordination bunker beneath the Atacama Desert, standing at a tactical display that showed the Dominion fleet as 43 cold blue icons descending through the solar system like a slow, inevitable tide. "The final authorization codes are ready," Akafer said. Vasquez didn't turn around. "What's the casualty projection for Stage 1? Akafer was quiet for a moment. "Between 11 and 14,000, mostly the station crews that volunteered to stay." "They did volunteer." "Yes, ma'am, they did." Vasquez finally turned. She was 53 years old, with the kind of face that had stopped performing emotion for audiences sometime around her 40th birthday. But something moved behind her eyes when she looked at Akafer, something that was not calculation and was not strategy, and had no name that military doctrine provided. "The aliens think we're afraid," Vasquez said. "I know." "Good," she turned back to the display. "Let them keep thinking that." Akafer hesitated. "General, the Security Council asked me to relay. Several members are still requesting a final confirmation that we've exhausted all diplomatic options before." "Tell them we exhausted diplomatic options the moment the Dominion transmitted a declaration instead of a question." Vasquez's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "They didn't ask if we wanted to join. They told us we were joining. That's not diplomacy. That's paperwork filed before a foregone conclusion." Akafer nodded slowly. "And if Stage 1 doesn't work?" Vasquez looked at the 43 blue icons. "Then we go to Stage 2, she said. "And if that doesn't work, we go to Stage 3, and if that doesn't work—" "There is no Stage 4, ma'am." "Then we'll make one." She said it so quietly that Akafer almost asked her to repeat it. Almost. Instead, Akafer returned to their station, entered the authorization codes, and began the sequence that would start the thing that had no good name. The thing that Earth's Unified Defense Command had spent 32 days building in total silence, while the Dominion's analysts watched and concluded they were in shock. They hadn't been in shock. They'd been working. The Dominion fleet was 41 hours from Earth's orbital shell when the first station fired. It wasn't a weapon, not in any category that the Dominion's threat assessment systems recognized as a weapon. The station, a structure that the fleet's advanced sensors had cataloged as a probable civilian orbital platform, too small and too lightly constructed to register as a military threat, released a focused pulse of coherent energy along a very specific vector. The pulse was not aimed at the fleet. It was aimed at the space between the fleet and Earth. Fleet Admiral Koss watched the sensor readout with professional confusion. The pulse had traveled 140,000 kilometers at the speed of light, hit a region of apparently empty space, and then— "What is that?" Koss asked. "Unknown," said the sensor officer. "The energy has refracted. The dispersion pattern matches nothing in our database. It appears to be a pause. Admiral, the space it contacted has changed its optical properties. It is now reflecting approximately 80% of incident electromagnetic radiation." Koss processed this. It made a mirror. "A large mirror, Admiral, approximately 40 kilometers across, and—" The second station fired. The third. The fourth. Across 6 different orbital positions. Human stations that the Dominion's pre-arrival survey had dismissed, as civilian infrastructure began firing coherent pulses into empty space. And in empty space, those pulses were assembling something, a vast, interlocking array of altered spatial geometry. each segment connecting to the others in a structure that had no analog in any Dominion weapons catalog, because it had been designed by minds that had approached the problem from a direction that Dominion military doctrine did not have a name for. Koss ordered evasive action immediately. The cradle formation broke apart, 43 ships peeling into independent approach vectors, because every military instinct Koss possessed was screaming that the thing assembling in the space ahead was a weapon, even if the analysis systems couldn't classify it. Koss was right. But Koss was also wrong about something more important, and the wrongness of that second thing was what would later keep Veth awake in the debriefing chamber, playing the sensor logs over and over. The stations that were firing, the 11 stations whose coordinated pulses were building the spatial array, 4 of them were crewed. The Dominion sensors could detect life signs. The crews were still aboard. And they knew it. Okafor's voice came over the command channel. Stage 1 array at 60% integrity. Admiral, the Dominion formation has broken. They're scattering. Vasquez watched the tactical display. The 43 blue icons were separating, trying to find approach vectors that kept them outside the array's growing footprint. Buying time, looking for gaps. Stations 7, 9, and 11, Vasquez said. Confirm crew status. Confirmed aboard, ma'am. Commanders Ryu, Destat, and Holloway have all confirmed ready. Something crossed Vasquez's face that the history books would later struggle to categorize. Tell them, she stopped, started again. Tell them Earth remembers. A pause on the channel. Yes, General. Stations 7, 9, and 11 continued firing. The Dominion's evasive scatter pattern had exposed a geometric problem. To maintain the array's integrity, the stations needed to hold position. And to break the array before it reached full integrity, the fleet needed to destroy the stations. But destroying the stations required approaching the stations. And approaching the stations meant entering the array's effective radius while it was still building. Koss recognized the trap. Koss ordered 2 ships to run the approach anyway, to destroy Station 7 at highest available speed. The ships ran it. They were good ships. They fired on Station 7 at extreme range, and their weapons were excellent, and the station was small and fragile and should have come apart in seconds. Station 7 was still firing when it died. The last pulse it sent out connected the 61st segment of the array. At 62 segments, the array was complete. Koss had 2 ships inside the radius when it activated. Veth, 3 months later, could not find words in any language to describe what the sensor logs showed happened next. The Dominion's analysis systems kept returning error codes when asked to classify the event. The closest approximation, in Standard Interstellar's most technical vocabulary, was the space between the fleet's forward element and Earth ceased to permit travel in one specific direction. It wasn't a wall. It wasn't a field. It wasn't anything the Dominion had encountered or theorized or included in its comprehensive catalog of known physics. The 2 ships inside the radius stopped. Not damaged, not destroyed. They simply stopped moving toward Earth, in the same way that objects simply stop moving when they have encountered a surface. Except there was no surface. There was only space that had, in a very precise and localized way, been given a new opinion about the direction of travel. The rest of the fleet, outside the radius, could move freely in any direction except toward Earth. Koss spent 47 minutes ordering increasingly creative approach vectors, diagonal, spiraling, high declination arcs that would have come at Earth from above the orbital plane. Every approach that entered the array's footprint stopped. Every approach outside the array's footprint was still outside Earth's orbital shell. The fleet was 43 warships that could not get to the planet they had come to absorb. This was when Koss transmitted to General Vasquez. "What have you done?" The answer came back after a 6-second light delay pause, in Vasquez's same flat, unhurried voice. "We've made you stop," she said. "Now we need to make you leave." Veth had reviewed the next 12 hours of sensor logs so many times that the events had worn grooves in Veth's memory. What made them impossible to stop reviewing was not the military content. Veth was a chronicler, not a strategist. The military architecture of what Earth had done was beyond Veth's detailed understanding, though the broad shape of it was clear enough. What kept Veth coming back was a specific sensor record from Hour 7 of the standoff. The Dominion fleet, unable to advance and unwilling yet to retreat, had taken up a holding pattern outside the array's footprint. Koss had been transmitting requests for negotiation every 30 minutes. Vasquez had not responded to any of them. In Hour 7, a small vessel had launched from Earth's surface. Not military, the sensor profile showed it was a communications shuttle, unarmed, with a crew of 3. It flew to the very edge of the array's footprint and stopped there, hovering in the narrow strip of navigable space between the array boundary and the nearest Dominion warship. The shuttle transmitted on an open, unencrypted frequency. A human voice, not Vasquez's, said, "We'd like to talk to your crew, not your admiral, your crew." Koss ordered no response. The shuttle waited. 4 hours later, a junior signals officer aboard the cruiser Asterisk Relentless Meridian broke protocol and opened a channel. Why? The signals officer asked. It was not a specific question. It somehow didn't need to be. The human voice on the shuttle said, "Because you're people, and you should know what you came here to do from the perspective of the people you were going to do it to." Veth had no record of what was said in the next 2 hours of that channel. The signals officer had transmitted on a frequency that only the shuttle received, and the shuttle's records were not among the documents the Dominion had subsequently recovered. What Veth had was the signals officer's duty log entry, filed 6 hours later, which contained exactly one sentence outside the standard format. "I did not know." Veth didn't know what it meant. That was the third mystery. The one that had no answer anywhere in the recovered records. The one that made Veth feel, in a way that was deeply uncomfortable for a professional chronicler trained in the empirical traditions of the Dominion civil service, that there was something about humans that the Dominion's entire analytical framework was structurally incapable of measuring. The standoff lasted 9 days. On day 3, the Dominion fleet attempted to destroy the array by targeting its spatial anchor points, the locations in empty space where the human station's pulses had created the first geometric alterations. This required an extremely precise and coordinated simultaneous strike across a volume of space roughly the size of Earth's moon. The strike was precise. It was coordinated. It hit every anchor point within a 3-millisecond window. The array absorbed it. Not countered, not shielded, absorbed. The energy of the Dominion strike was taken into the array's geometric structure and used to reinforce 2 of the segments that had been showing minor degradation. Koss stared at the sensor readout for a very long time. Then Koss transmitted to Vasquez again. "That should have worked," Koss said. Vasquez's voice came back after the light delay. "Yes, we know. You designed it to absorb energy. We designed it to get stronger when you attacked it." A pause. "Why would you tell me that?" "Because," Vasquez said, and Veth had listened to this recording 40 times and still felt the weight of it each time, "we want you to understand exactly what you're dealing with before you make your next decision. We're not trying to humiliate you. We're trying to give you accurate information." Koss's response after a longer pause, "And if I simply wait, the array must have a power requirement." "It does," Vasquez said. "We've fueled it for 2 years." Koss went quiet. 2 years, Veth repeated to the empty debriefing chamber. Not because it was strategically significant, though it was. Because of what it meant. Because the array had been designed and built and fueled for 2 years, before the declaration, before the Dominion had made any move toward Earth, before Earth had any specific intelligence that an invasion was coming. The humans had been building it anyway. Not because they knew the Dominion was coming. Because they had looked at the galaxy, at the evidence embedded in 40 years of received signals from other civilizations, in the mathematical signature of what interstellar communication patterns looked like when they suddenly and permanently stopped. And they had concluded, collectively, through the bureaucratic miracle of international consensus, that should theoretically have been impossible for a species with Earth's political history, that something was coming eventually. And they had spent 2 years making it unable to get through. They hadn't been afraid of the Dominion specifically. They'd been afraid of what the galaxy was, and they had built accordingly. Veth's hands were shaking. Veth noticed this distantly, the way you notice weather. On day 5, the Dominion fleet received a priority transmission from Imperial Command. Veth had reviewed this document extensively. It was extraordinary in its content. Imperial Command, reviewing Task Force Orion situation reports, had authorized COS to employ weapons of the 5th category against the array's anchor points. 5th category weapons were not used against inhabited systems. This was not a moral prohibition. It was a practical one. 5th category weapons did not discriminate between targets and backdrop. They tended to sterilize approximately everything within a significant radius. Imperial Command had authorized their use anyway. If the array cannot be breached through conventional means, the transmission read, and if continued presence without successful absorption creates unacceptable precedent for the Dominion standing in the quadrant, then strategic elimination of Earth's military capacity. COS did not transmit that communication to Vasquez. Veth had confirmed this. The logs showed COS received it, read it twice, and filed it without forwarding. Then COS did something that Veth found inexplicable for 4 days, until reviewing the log of the signals officer's open channel with the human shuttle on day 1. COS opened a private, encrypted channel to Vasquez. Not a command channel, a personal frequency. "I need to tell you something," COS said, "off record." The channel showed Vasquez's response came back in 17 seconds, faster than the light delay allowed for, which meant Vasquez had been watching the fleet's frequency outputs and had connected before COS's voice could have physically reached her. She had been waiting for this. "I'm listening," Vasquez said. "Imperial Command has authorized 5th category deployment," COS said. "I want you to understand what that means." "I know what it means." "Then you understand why COS stopped, why I felt I needed to tell you." A silence. "Then Vasquez, are you going to use them?" "That depends on what you're about to offer me." "I'm not going to offer you anything, Admiral." Vasquez's voice stayed level. "We're not negotiating, but I am going to tell you something that may affect your decision." "Tell me." "If you deploy 5th category weapons against Earth," Vasquez said, "and if Earth survives even partially, the information about what you did will reach every civilization in this quadrant within 10 years. Your own signals propagate at the same speed ours do, and civilizations that are currently accepting your declaration of absorption peacefully will have to ask themselves whether peaceful absorption will protect them from 5th category deployment when the Dominion finds it convenient." A pause. "We're not your biggest problem, Admiral. We're the example you're making. The question is what example?" COS was silent for a long time. "You've thought about this very carefully," COS finally said. "For 2 years," Vasquez said, "probably longer." What happened on day 9 was the part that broke the Dominion's framework entirely, and it was also the part that Veth had to reconstruct from the most fragmented records, because the events occurred simultaneously across too many locations for any single sensor platform to capture completely. At 3:47 Fleet Standard Time, General Vasquez gave an order. Veth didn't know what the order was. It wasn't in any recovered document. What Veth knew was the effect. 11 things happened in a sequence, so tight it was nearly simultaneous. The array shifted. Not dissolved, not deactivated. Shifted, its geometric footprint contracted inward, the anchor points redistributing, the boundary moving from 40 kilometers outside Earth's orbital shell to 140,000 kilometers beyond it. The two Dominion ships that had been stopped inside the original footprint were suddenly, simply free. And then the array's new, contracted geometry did something that the Dominion sensor team spent 3 weeks arguing about, because it required accepting a physical principle that the Dominion's best theorists classified as borderline impossible. It reflected the spatial geometry that had been blocking inward travel for 9 days had been rebuilt to permit inward travel and instead block outward travel. The two freed Dominion ships, their pilots reacting to their sudden freedom with the instinct of professional military officers, immediately attempted to return to the fleet. They couldn't. They were inside the new boundary now. They were, from the perspective of the array's geometry, inside Earth's defended shell. Their outward travel was blocked. COS had 41 warships outside the boundary and 2 warships inside it, and no way to connect the two groups, and no way to know, because the specific geometry of what Earth had built did not exist in any Dominion weapons catalog, whether the two ships inside were being held as leverage or were simply caught by a mechanism that operated without intent. Vasquez's voice came over the fleet-wide frequency before COS could transmit anything. "Admiral, your 2 ships are undamaged and their crews are unharmed. We are not holding them as leverage. They moved into the new boundary's footprint before our automated warning could reach them. We are working on a method to create a transit window to return them to your fleet. This will take approximately 6 hours." A pause. "We would appreciate," Vasquez continued, "if you use those 6 hours to review everything you know about Earth and ask yourself one question. If we wanted your 2 ships destroyed, would they still be here?" The 6 hours passed. The transit window opened. The 2 ships returned to the fleet, their crews physically unharmed, carrying with them a data package that Vasquez had loaded into their communication systems. The package was addressed to COS personally. It contained no weapon schematics, no tactical information, no demands. It contained footage, 40 years of Earth's broadcast media curated and compiled and subtitled in standard interstellar, documentaries, historical records, news broadcasts, children's programs, court proceedings, protest movements, scientific lectures, music, funerals. A civilization. Not a military capability, not a threat assessment. People. COS watched 6 hours of it before transmitting to Imperial Command, with a recommendation that Task Force Orion withdraw to the transit fold point and request a diplomatic reassignment. Imperial Command denied the request. COS transmitted again, 40 minutes later. "I am not asking," COS said. The fleet withdrew. Veth finished the final log review at 2:11 in the morning, in the silence of the debriefing chamber. 47 days after Task Force, Orion returned to Dominion space without Earth. The official report was going to be a problem. Veth knew this. The official report was going to have to explain to Imperial Command, to the Eternal Throne itself, how 43 warships had been stopped by a civilization that should, by every metric the Dominion used to measure civilizations, have surrendered in the first 72 hours. Veth had spent 47 days trying to find the right framework for what had happened. The array was extraordinary, certainly. The physics of it would occupy Dominion theorists for decades. The strategic calculation behind the standoff, using the threat of fifth category deployment as a political lever against the Dominion's own wider empire, turning Earth's potential destruction into the Dominion's reputational liability, was, In hindsight, the kind of thinking that Veth recognized as genuine strategic genius. But none of that was actually the answer. Veth had realized this slowly, the way important realizations tend to come, not as a single moment of clarity, but as a gradual accumulation of pressure until the framework cracked. The answer was the signals officer. The signals officer from the relentless Meridian who had broken protocol to open a channel to the human shuttle, whose duty log had contained one inexplicable sentence: "I did not know." Veth had requested that signals officers debrief records. They had been classified. Veth had escalated, still classified. Veth had gone higher and then higher again, and eventually reached a level of Imperial command structure where someone had looked at Veth's clearance level and at the specific request and had said, carefully, that debrief doesn't exist in a form we're prepared to release. Why, Veth had asked. Because, the official had said, with the expression of someone choosing words from a very limited and very carefully considered vocabulary. What the signals officer learned in that conversation has affected the signals officer's willingness to continue serving, and the content of what was said is under review for potential classification as a psychologically hazardous communication, and we are not prepared to establish a precedent for wider dissemination until we understand its mechanism better. Veth had stared at the official for a long time. A psychologically hazardous communication, Veth said. Yes. The humans talked to a crew member for 2 hours, and the content of that conversation is classified as a psychological hazard. Yes. What did they say? We don't fully know, the official admitted. The signals officer will not repeat it in debriefing. The officer says, a pause. The officer says there isn't a way to repeat it that would carry the same weight, that the words themselves aren't the point, that the point was what it felt like to hear the words from the specific people saying them. Veth went back to the debriefing chamber and sat in the silence for a long time. The humans had not won with their array, though the array was remarkable. They had not won with Vasquez's strategic calculation, though the calculation was extraordinary. They had won because at the moment of maximum military confrontation, they had sent an unarmed shuttle to the edge of the battle line and asked to talk to the crew. Not the admiral, the crew. And in 2 hours, they had said something to one person in one conversation that the Dominion's entire intelligence apparatus could not reconstruct or classify or safely distribute, because the thing they had said was not information. It was not argument. It was not persuasion in any form that the Dominion's psychological models covered. It was something the humans did with the specific texture of their voices, in the specific circumstance of what they were facing, at the specific moment when being heard by one person felt different from being heard by an admiral or an empire. They had made someone understand. And understanding, it turned out, propagated in ways that fifth-category weapons could not reach, and spatial arrays could not replicate, and Imperial command could not classify out of existence. The report Veth filed was accurate, exhaustively, professionally, meticulously accurate, every sensor log, every tactical decision, every anomaly and its timestamp. The physics of the array described to the limits of Veth's technical vocabulary, the strategic logic of Vasquez's political leverage play, the withdrawal, all of it. What Veth could not put in the report was the conclusion, because the conclusion was not a finding that fit in an Imperial report's conclusion field. Veth wrote it anyway, in the private log that chroniclers were permitted to keep, in the personal notation that would never pass through a classifier's review. We went to Earth to absorb a civilization. We assumed absorption was the natural endpoint of the encounter because, in 6,000 years and 207 civilizations, it had always been the endpoint. We were wrong not because Earth was stronger than us. They are not stronger than us. Their array was brilliant, and their strategy was exceptional, and their admiral was remarkable, but the Dominion could have destroyed them if we had been willing to pay the price. We were wrong because Earth made us unwilling to pay the price. And I don't think they did it with technology. I think they did it with the conversation. I think, and I will never be able to prove this, and I will never stop believing it, that the humans have been practicing for a very long time at finding the specific angle from which, when you look at them, they stop being a target. They have been fighting each other for millennia. They have developed forms of conflict resolution, persuasion, narrative, and emotional communication that we did not recognize as weapons because they are not aimed at bodies. The signals officer said, "I did not know." I did not know either. I'm not certain the Dominion is capable of knowing, because knowing would require feeling it. And feeling it would require being the kind of thing that can be reached by a human voice from an unarmed shuttle at the edge of a battle line. I am terrified that the Dominion is not that kind of thing. I am more terrified that Earth knew that about us before we knew it about ourselves. 3 months later, a second transmission arrived from Earth on the same frequency Vasquez had used throughout the standoff. It was not addressed to the Dominion. It was addressed to Fleet Admiral Koss personally. It said, "We heard about what you did, the recommendation, what it cost you. We thought you should know that it mattered." There was no strategic content, no negotiation, no leverage. Just 9 words. Koss had been reassigned to an administrative post in the Outer Territories, stripped of fleet command for the unauthorized withdrawal. Koss's career was effectively over. Koss read the transmission in a small office on a station at the edge of Dominion space, far from Earth, far from any front. Veth learned later, through the kind of informal channel that official chroniclers are not supposed to use, that Koss had read it 11 times. The Dominion spent 4 years debating what to do about Earth. The debate is still ongoing. No second task force has been dispatched. The array is still up. And somewhere in a debriefing room that no longer officially exists, a signals officer is not talking. Because there are things humans know how to do with their voices and their stories, and the specific weight of being looked at as people rather than as targets. Things they have practiced across all the long, brutal, brilliant, catastrophic centuries of their own history, that cannot be extracted, classified, or made safe. The Dominion came to Earth to add a civilization to its ledger. It found something it did not have a category for. Not a weapon. Not an army. Not a technology. Something older and stranger and harder to survive than any of those things. A species that had learned, through every war and every cruelty and every terrible thing it had done to itself and survived, exactly how to make you feel the cost of what you were about to do before you did it. And had decided when the ships came that the most dangerous thing it could aim at an empire was not an array. It was understanding. The Dominion is still not sure what to do about a species like that. Probably in the long centuries ahead, it will have to learn. Whether it survives the education is a question the galaxy is watching closely. And Earth is still there, waiting.